The scent of overbrewed coffee and my mother-in-law Florence's aggressively festive potpourri always signaled the true star of our Christmas ordeal, a scent I'd come to associate with a peculiar blend of forced cheer and simmering familial tensions. My name is Alex Miller, 47 years old, and for 2 decades I've worked as a forensic accountant, a profession that trains you to meticulously examine details, identify discrepancies, and follow the money, or in this case, the often uneven flow of affection and material goods within the complex ecosystem of my wife Laura's family. Our daughter, Emily, who was 9 that year, sat with a carefully constructed patience on the worn floral carpet of Florence and Henry's living room. Her cousins, my sister-in-law Carol's 3 children, 10-year-old twins, Ben and Tom, and 7-year-old Sophie, were already a whirlwind of torn wrapping paper and delighted shrieks. The air was thick with the sounds of their excitement, a stark contrast to the quiet hope that still flickered in Emily's eyes. Laura caught my gaze from across the room, where she was politely fending off Florence's 5th offer of a lukewarm mince pie. Laura's small, almost imperceptible sigh was a shared language between us, a shorthand for, "Here we go again." I gave a minute nod in return, a silent assurance that the contingency plan, years in the making, was ready for deployment if necessary. The pile of gifts under the tinsel-laden tree, a monument to Florence's indiscriminate shopping habits, was rapidly diminishing. Ben and Tom were now comparing the features of their new, identical, top-of-the-line drones, their voices loud and competitive. Sophie was meticulously arranging a vast collection of miniature collectible ponies that apparently retailed for a sum that could fund a small nation's education budget. And Emily continued to wait, her small hands clasped in her lap, a polite smile fixed on her face. Florence, with the dramatic flair of a game show hostess revealing the grand prize, picked up the last 2 items. One was a small, rather lumpy package, which she handed to her husband, Henry, with a coy, "Now, Henry, don't you get too excited. It's just that little thingamajig you wanted for your model trains." He chuckled dutifully. The other was a pathetically small, flat parcel, wrapped in paper that looked suspiciously like a reused department store bag, adorned with a single, sad-looking bow. "And this, my darling Emily," Florence trilled, her voice a little too loud, a little too saccharine, "is just a little something from Grandma and Grandpa to keep you busy." She presented it to Emily with a flourish that felt more like a dismissal than a genuine offering. I watched my daughter's face, a study in carefully controlled emotion. I saw the initial spark of hope quickly extinguished, followed by a polite, almost painful, attempt to mask her disappointment. She carefully unwrapped the gift. Inside, nestled against the cheap paper, was a set of off-brand crayons, the waxy, hard kind that barely leave a mark, and a thin, generic coloring book featuring crudely drawn farm animals. It was the sort of thing one might find in a dollar store bargain bin, a thoughtless afterthought. To make matters worse, the coloring book was clearly designed for a preschooler, not a bright, inquisitive 9-year-old who devoured chapter books and was currently obsessed with building complex architectural models out of recycled materials. Emily, my remarkable, resilient daughter, looked up at Florence and managed a small, quiet, "Thank you, Grandma." "It's nice." But the telltale shimmer in her eyes, the slight quiver of her lip, didn't escape my notice or Laura's. Carol, naturally, was oblivious, cooing over Sophie's ponies and loudly proclaiming them to be an investment in her imaginative development. Florence was already bustling towards the kitchen, announcing an urgent need for more lukewarm eggnog, effectively sidestepping any potential awkwardness, her standard operating procedure when her blatant favoritism was on display. The air in the room, already thick with the scent of synthetic pine, now seemed to crackle with unspoken resentment. This wasn't just a thoughtless gift. It was a message, a deliberate underscoring of Emily's perceived place in the family hierarchy, a hierarchy where Carol's children were royalty and Emily was, at best, a minor courtier. My own anger, usually a deeply buried, well-controlled variable, began to smolder. Years of these subtle and not-so-subtle slights, years of watching my intelligent, sensitive daughter be treated as an afterthought, had reached a critical mass. This was the moment. The data was conclusive. The discrepancy was undeniable. Laura stood up then, her movements graceful but imbued with a new, steely resolve I recognized. She walked over to Emily, knelt beside her, and gently took the pathetic coloring book. "That's a very practical little gift, sweetie," Laura said, her voice soft but carrying a clear, unwavering strength. Then, she reached into her handbag, a stylish leather satchel that Florence often complimented with a hint of envy, and pulled out a crisp, cream-colored envelope. It was embossed with the name of a prestigious law firm, a detail I knew Florence, with her acute sensitivity to status symbols, would not miss. "But Daddy and I, along with someone very special who loved you an immense amount, also have a little something for you. Something that acknowledges just how incredibly bright and capable you are." Laura handed the envelope to Emily. The room fell into a sudden, profound silence. Even the drone-piloting twins paused their aerial maneuvers, sensing a shift in the domestic weather pattern. Carol lowered her phone, her smug expression replaced by a look of sharp, suspicious curiosity. Florence and Henry, who had momentarily paused their kitchen activities, now stood in the doorway, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning apprehension. The project, meticulously planned and long dormant, was now fully activated. The years of quiet observation, of documenting the disparities, of Laura's growing disillusionment and my own carefully managed frustration, had led to this precise moment. The cheap crayons and the farm animal coloring book weren't just an insult. They were the final, irrefutable data point, the catalyst that triggered a pre-calculated, life-altering response. Emily looked at the envelope, then at Laura, then at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and a nascent, cautious hope. This was not just about a Christmas gift. This was about rewriting a narrative, about recalibrating a deeply flawed family dynamic. This was about structural integrity. And the old, unstable structure was about to experience a seismic event of our own careful design. The envelope held not just paper, but power. The power to affirm, to protect, and to fundamentally alter the landscape of our family's future. Emily turned the heavy, cream-colored envelope in her hands, her name and address typed elegantly on the front. The embossed insignia of McPherson, Vance and Albright, solicitors at law, in the top left corner lended an air of solemn importance that was a stark contrast to the flimsy, cartoon-adorned wrapping of her earlier gift. Laura and I had spent countless hours with Alistair McPherson, our solicitor and an old university friend of mine, structuring this very moment, ensuring every legal and I was dotted, every T crossed. This wasn't an impulsive act of retaliatory gift-giving. It was a carefully architected financial and emotional bulwark. The pattern of Florence and Carol's favoritism towards Carol's children, Ben, Tom, and Sophie, had been a long and consistent one, a data stream of slights and omissions that I, with my forensic accountant's mindset, had mentally cataloged for years. It wasn't just about the monetary value of gifts, though that was often a glaring disparity. It was about the thought, the attention, the acknowledgement of Emily's individual personality and interests. I recalled Emily's 7th birthday. We'd hosted a small party at our home. Florence had presented Emily with a generic, age-inappropriate board game, one clearly picked up in a hurry, still bearing a discount sticker from a pharmacy. Later that same week, Carol's son Ben had turned 8, and Florence had thrown him a lavish, themed party at a local adventure park, complete with a custom cake and a mountain of presents, gushing about his boundless energy and leadership potential. The contrast had been stark, and Emily, even at 7, had noticed. "Does Grandma not like my Lego castles as much as Ben's running around?" she'd ask me later, her small voice laced with a confusion that broke my heart. Then there were the school events. Florence and Henry rarely missed one of Ben, Tom, or Sophie's school plays or sports days, their attendance trumpeted as evidence of their devotion. Yet, when Emily had won the district science fair for her innovative robotics project, a project she'd spent months meticulously designing and building. Florence's response had been a dismissive, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Robots are a bit mechanical for a little girl, don't you think? Sophie is starting ballet, you know. So graceful." The constant, subtle implication was that Emily's interests, her talents, her very nature, were somehow less valuable, less worthy of celebration than those of her cousins. Laura had tried, on numerous occasions, to address the issue with her mother and sister, but her concerns were always brushed aside with accusations of her being too sensitive or reading too much into things. Florence would invariably pivot to Carol's supposed struggles as a stay-at-home mother of three, implying that Carol and her children simply needed more support, more attention, more everything. It was a masterclass in emotional deflection, and it left Laura feeling frustrated and unheard. The breaking point for me, the moment I decided that passive observation was no longer sufficient, had come 2 years prior, during a family discussion about summer vacation plans. Carol had proposed an expensive trip to a theme park resort, a trip clearly beyond her and Tom's independent means. Florence had immediately offered to fund a significant portion of it, for the sake of the grandchildren having a magical experience. When Laura had gently suggested that perhaps a more modest, inclusive vacation might be fairer to everyone, Florence had looked at her with genuine bewilderment. "But darling," she'd said, "Ben, Tom, and Sophie adore these characters. Emily always enjoys a good book, doesn't she? She's much more of an indoor child." That was when the idea of the trust, funded by an inheritance Laura had received from her maternal grandmother, Eleanor, began to take shape. Grandma Eleanor, a wonderfully pragmatic and astute woman, had always seen Emily's quiet intelligence and unique spark. Her will had left a substantial sum directly to Laura, with the expressed wish that it be used for Emily's long-term benefit and enrichment. For 2 years, that inheritance had sat in a secure, high-interest account, waiting. Laura and I had discussed it at length. We could have used it to supplement Emily's annual gifts, to try and compete with the largesse bestowed upon her cousins. But that felt like playing their game, a game designed to constantly remind Emily of her perceived lesser status. No. We needed something more definitive, something that would not only provide for Emily's future, but would also send an unequivocal message to Florence and Carol. We met with Alistair McPherson. He understood the family dynamics immediately. "Ah," he'd said, a wry smile playing on his lips after Laura had recounted yet another tale of blatant favoritism. The classic golden child and the other one's child scenario. Not uncommon, regrettably. What you need, my dears, is not just a financial instrument, but a statement of irrefutable value. An irrevocable trust, managed by you as dedicated trustees, for Emily's sole and exclusive benefit, is precisely the ticket. And so, the Emily Miller Future Enrichment Trust was legally established, funded by the entirety of Grandma Eleanor's legacy. The terms were ironclad, designed to protect the funds from any external claims or influences, ensuring they would be available for Emily's education, her passions, her future security, as we, her parents, saw fit. We had deliberately kept it quiet, waiting for the opportune moment, the moment when Florence and Carol's behavior crossed a line so egregiously that our response would be not just justified, but unavoidable. The cheap coloring book, in its pathetic inadequacy, was that moment. Now, in the stunned silence of the living room, Emily carefully slid her finger under the flap of the solicitor's envelope. Inside, there was not money, but a beautifully printed certificate, embossed and sealed, and a letter from Alistair McPherson's firm. She unfolded the letter, her brow furrowed as she tried to decipher the dense legal phrasing. Laura gently leaned in. "Let me help you with that, sweet pea," she said, her voice a soothing balm in the charged atmosphere. She took the letter and cleared her throat, her gaze sweeping across the room, meeting Florence's wide, unblinking stare, Carol's increasingly thunderous expression, and Henry's dazed confusion, before finally resting on Emily. "This letter," Laura began, her voice clear, resonant, and utterly devoid of apology, is from Mr. Alistair McPherson. It confirms, my darling Emily, that as of this morning, the Emily Miller Future Enrichment Trust has been formally activated and fully funded with a principal sum of, she paused, drawing out the moment, the tension in the room ratcheting up to an almost unbearable degree, £285,000, bequeathed to you by your great-grandmother Eleanor, to be used for your education, your personal development, and the pursuit of your unique and wonderful talents under the sole discretion of your loving parents. The only sound in the room was the sharp intake of Carol's breath, a sound like a punctured balloon. £285,000. It was a figure that resonated with the unmistakable clang of significance, a figure that spoke volumes more than any argument or recrimination could ever achieve. The coloring book lay forgotten on the floor, a pathetic symbol of their miscalculation, utterly eclipsed by the weight of Grandma Eleanor's profound and enduring validation. The sum of £285,000 hung in the air, a figure so substantial it seemed to suck all the festive oxygen out of Florence's meticulously decorated living room. Florence herself looked as though she'd been struck by a rogue reindeer. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound emerged. Carol, however, found her voice with alarming speed, a choked, furious gasp. 200, that's impossible. Eleanor wouldn't. She always said her estate was to be divided equally among her grandchildren's lines. That means my three should get— Actually, Carol, I interjected, my voice calm and measured, stepping forward to stand beside Laura and Emily, a united front. This was the part of the project plan I had mentally labeled stakeholder objections management. Grandma Eleanor's was quite nuanced. While she did indeed make provisions for all her great-grandchildren, she also left a significant discretionary fund directly to Laura, her only granddaughter, with very specific instructions that it be used to nurture and support Emily's unique potential, particularly in areas where she showed exceptional aptitude, such as science, technology, and the arts, areas, I might add, that have been consistently overlooked or undervalued by certain other family members. I let my gaze linger on Carol, then shift to Florence. Laura and I, after careful consideration and consultation with our legal and financial advisors, determined that the most effective way to honor Grandma Eleanor's wishes and to secure Emily's future was to establish this irrevocable trust. It ensures that these funds are protected, managed professionally, and dedicated solely to Emily's long-term enrichment and opportunities. Florence finally spluttered. But why wasn't I consulted? I'm her grandmother, Henry, and I should have been part of this decision. With all due respect, Florence, Laura said, her voice firm but not unkind. This was Grandma Eleanor's legacy to Emily, entrusted to us, her parents, to manage. And frankly, given the historical pattern of resource allocation within this family, we felt it was imperative to create a structure that guarantees Emily's share is preserved exclusively for her, free from any external pressures or competing interests. The euphemism competing interests was a masterpiece of polite understatement, and I saw from the flash of anger in Carol's eyes that it had landed exactly as intended. So, you're saying my children are competing interests? Carol shrieked, her face mottling with rage. You're saying they're not as deserving as your precious, perfect Emily? This is just a disgusting ploy to hoard money and make the rest of us look bad. Ben and Tom, the drone-piloting twins, had now ceased all activity, their expensive toys abandoned as they watched their mother's meltdown with wide, frightened eyes. Sophie, the youngest, began to sniffle, sensing the shift from festive cheer to outright hostility. This isn't about making anyone look bad, Carol, Mark said, stepping in, his voice resonating with a quiet authority that even Carol found difficult to challenge directly. Mark, my husband, was a structural engineer, a man who, like me, understood the importance of solid foundations. He usually preferred to avoid confrontation within his family, often deferring to Laura or me to handle the more delicate interpersonal dynamics. But today, seeing the blatant slight against his daughter, and now the unedifying spectacle of his sister's greed, something had snapped. A load-bearing pillar of patience had finally reached its stress limit. This is about fairness for Emily, Mark continued. It's about recognizing that for years, she has been consistently and deliberately made to feel like an afterthought. Today's gift was simply the final straw, the most blatant example yet. Grandma Eleanor's legacy has provided us with the means to correct that imbalance permanently. Lily's future education, her ability to pursue her passions, whether it's robotics camp this summer or attending a top university in 10 years, will not be contingent on anyone's fleeting generosity or biased approval. It is secured by us. For her, Henry, who had been a silent, increasingly uncomfortable observer, finally cleared his throat. Now, Carol. Mark, let's not. It's Christmas Day. His attempt at peacemaking was feeble, like trying to stop a runaway train with a feather duster. No, Dad, it's not just Christmas Day, Mark said, his gaze unwavering. It's the day we decided that enough is enough. It's the day we chose to invest in our daughter's future in a way that reflects her true worth, a worth that, frankly, has been consistently undervalued in this house. He then knelt beside Emily, who was watching this familial implosion with a mixture of awe and apprehension. He gently took the solicitor's letter from her. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice softening, "this might seem very grown-up and confusing right now, but what it means is that great-grandma Eleanor loved you very, very much, and she wanted you to have every chance to be the amazing person you are. This money will help you go to the best schools, learn incredible things, and build whatever wonderful future you can dream of. It's your special adventure fund, okay?" Emily nodded, a slow, solemn understanding dawning in her eyes. She looked at the expensive, discarded drones of her cousins, then at the cheap coloring books still lying by the tree, and then back at the embossed letter in her father's hand. The relative values were becoming starkly, undeniably clear, even to a 9-year-old. "So," she said, her voice small but clear, "this is like a super mega ultra gift? Better than a drone?" Mark laughed, a genuine, heartfelt sound that seemed to momentarily dispel some of the oppressive tension. "Yes, my love, infinitely better than a drone. This is a gift that will keep on giving for your whole life." He stood up, facing his mother and sister again. "And just to be clear," he added, his voice hardening once more, "any attempt to interfere with this trust, to pressure Emily, or to create further unpleasantness for Laura or me regarding this matter, will be met with an immediate and permanent cessation of all non-essential contact. We're done walking on eggshells. We are done accepting crumbs of affection for our daughter. From this day forward, Emily comes first, unequivocally." The finality in his voice was absolute. Florence looked as though she might faint. Carol was momentarily speechless, her face a mask of thwarted entitlement. The project plan had anticipated resistance, but the sheer force of Mark's conviction, coupled with the unassailable legal and financial reality of the trust, seemed to have overwhelmed their usual tactics of emotional blackmail and guilt-tripping. The foundations had not just been shored up, they had been entirely rebuilt with reinforced, legal-grade steel. The immediate aftermath of Mark's definitive statement was a fragile, ringing silence. Carol, for once, seemed to have no immediate retort. Her face cycled through a series of emotions: shock, fury, disbelief, and finally a sort of sullen, impotent rage. Florence looked utterly deflated, her usual bustling energy completely gone, replaced by a bewildered stillness. Henry, bless his non-confrontational heart, just kept staring at a particularly garish bauble on the Christmas tree as if it held the secrets to the universe. Tom, Carol's husband, who had maintained an almost catatonic silence throughout the entire exchange, finally cleared his throat. "Well," he began, his voice raspy, I think perhaps we should be going. The boys need their naps." It was the lamest of excuses, but everyone seized upon it with a desperate gratitude. The tension in the room was unbearable, and any pretext for escape was welcome. Carol, without another word, began to gather her children, her movements jerky and abrupt. Jake and Ben, sensing the abrupt shift in the holiday mood and their mother's barely suppressed fury, started to whine, their earlier excitement over their drones completely forgotten. Sophie, bless her, simply looked confused, clutching her herd of miniature ponies as if they were a lifeline. Florence made a feeble attempt at a hostess-like recovery. Oh, but there's still so much eggnog. And the fruitcake. I made your father's favorite fruitcake. Her voice trailed off as Carol, dragging a now wailing Sophie by the hand, practically bolted for the front door, Tom and the twins scrambling in her wake. The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the suddenly quiet house. We were left with Florence and Henry, and the ghosts of Christmases past, present, and almost certainly future. Florence sank onto the sofa, the one with the slightly faded chintz floral pattern, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely old, genuinely defeated. Henry patted her shoulder awkwardly. Now, Flo, he mumbled. It's a lot to take in. A lot to take in, Florence repeated, her voice a reedy whisper. Henry, did you hear what Mark said? 285,000 pounds. For one child. It's obscene. It's Grandma Eleanor's money, Mother, Mark said, his voice gentle now, the earlier steel having receded. And it's for Emily's future. It's not about the amount. It's about the intent. It's about ensuring she has the same opportunities, the same sense of value that you've always so readily bestowed upon Carol's children. Florence dabbed at her eyes with a lace-trimmed handkerchief that seemed to materialize from nowhere. But we love Emily. Of course we do. Carol's children, they're younger. They have more needs, her voice faltered, the usual excuses sounding hollow, even to her own ears in the face of the stark financial reality that had just been unveiled. Their needs, Florence, I interjected, keeping my tone as neutral as possible, have always seemed to translate into more expensive gifts, more focused attention, more overt praise. Emily's needs, for intellectual stimulation, for recognition of her unique talents, for a sense of belonging and equal worth within her own extended family. Those have been consistently overlooked. That's the discrepancy we're addressing. The trust is simply a tool to ensure her needs are met, robustly and independently. Henry sighed a long, weary sound. He looked at Mark, then at me, then at Lily, who was now quietly examining the embossed letterhead on the solicitor's certificate, her earlier upset forgotten in the face of this astonishing new reality. Eleanor, she was a formidable woman, Henry said, a note of grudging respect in his voice. Always knew her own mind, and she always did have a soft spot for young Emily. Said she reminded her of herself as a girl, quiet, observant, but with a mind like a steel trap. This was news to me, a precious piece of data I stored away. Grandma Eleanor, it seemed, had been conducting her own quiet assessment of the family dynamics for years. Mark put his arm around Lily. Well, Dad, Grandma Eleanor's foresight is now Emily's good fortune, and Laura and I intend to be excellent stewards of that good fortune. He paused, then added, his voice firm but not unkind. And while we hope that, in time, you and Mother can find a way to treat Lily with the genuine affection and respect she deserves, her future opportunities will no longer be dependent on that hope. They are guaranteed. We didn't stay much longer. The festive atmosphere had irrevocably curdled. We helped clear away some of the debris from the gift opening, a strange, almost surreal activity given the emotional shrapnel still hanging in the air. Florence remained on the sofa, dazed and uncharacteristically silent. Henry walked us to the door, his usual jovial farewell replaced by a quiet, thoughtful nod. As we drove away, Lily, strapped securely in the back seat, holding her precious envelope, finally spoke. Daddy? Mommy, she asked, her voice small but clear. Does this mean I can finally go to that robotic summer camp? The one that was too expensive. Laura and I exchanged a look over the seat. It was a look of profound, shared relief and a dawning, joyful anticipation of the future. Yes, my darling, I said, turning to smile at her. It means you can go to any robotics camp you want, or astronomy camp, or become a leading geotechnical engineer who designs foundations for Martian colonies, if that's what your heart desires. Lily's face broke into a radiant smile, a smile so bright it seemed to light up the entire car. It was the smile of a child who suddenly understood, on a deep, visceral level, that her dreams were not just permissible, but actively, powerfully, and irrevocably supported. The project, I thought, had not just met its objectives. It had unlocked a whole new level of potential. And the return on that investment would be immeasurable. The drive home was quiet, but it was a comfortable, contented quiet, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that had followed our arrival at Florence and Henry's earlier that day. Emily, in the back seat, had fallen asleep, the solicitor's envelope clutched carefully in her hand, a peaceful smile on her face. Laura reached over and squeezed my hand. "Well," she said, her voice a little shaky but filled with an undeniable undertone of triumph. "That was quite the Christmas." "Indeed," I replied. "One for the family archives, I suspect." Under the heading, Significant Structural Readjustment, Laura laughed, a genuine, unrestrained sound that I hadn't heard in her parents' house for a very long time. "You, in your forensic accounting terms, Alex. But yes, that about sums it up." When we got home, we carried a sleeping Emily upstairs and tucked her into bed. As Laura smoothed her hair back from her forehead, she whispered, "She looks so peaceful, like a weight has been lifted from her, even if she doesn't fully understand it all yet." "She understands the most important part," I said. "She understands she's valued deeply, and that we, and her great-grandma Eleanor, have her back, unequivocally." Later, as Laura and I sat in our own living room, the chaos of the in-laws' house a receding memory, we talked about the future. "What do you think will happen now?" Laura asked, swirling the wine in her glass. "With your mom and Carol? Honestly, I don't know," I admitted. "Florence and Carol have a deeply ingrained pattern of behavior. One seismic event, however significant, might not be enough to fundamentally alter their core programming. They may try to guilt-trip us. They may try to find ways to challenge the trust, though Alistair assures me it's ironclad. They may simply retreat into a state of permanent victimhood, casting us as the villains who stole their granddaughter's rightful affection, or some such nonsense. But they can't actually do anything, can they?" Laura asked, a note of anxiety in her voice. "Not in any way that can harm Emily or undermine the trust," I reassured her. "Legally, we're on solid ground. Emotionally, well, that's a different battlefield. But it's one where we now hold a significant strategic advantage. We're no longer willing to play by their old rules. We decided that our approach moving forward would be one of polite but firm boundaries. We would not engage in arguments or relitigate the past. We would not allow Emily to be used as a pawn or subjected to any further slights. Any future family gatherings would be carefully considered, and we would not hesitate to decline or leave if the atmosphere became toxic. Our primary responsibility was to Emily's well-being, and that would guide all our decisions. The following weeks brought a predictable series of aftershocks. Florence made several tearful phone calls to Laura, lamenting the broken family, and pleading for us to reconsider this drastic action for Emily's sake, as if a secure financial future was somehow detrimental to a child. Laura, to her immense credit, remained calm and resolute, repeating that the decision was final and in Emily's best interest, and that any future relationship would depend on Florence's willingness to treat Emily with genuine respect and fairness. Carol, after her initial outburst of fury, adopted a strategy of icy silence, punctuated by occasional passive-aggressive posts on social media about the importance of treating all children equally and the pain of seeing family favoritism. These were clearly aimed at us, but so transparent in their bitterness that they were almost comical. We ignored them. The real surprise came from Henry. About a month after Christmas, he called me directly. "Alex," he said, his voice hesitant, "I've been doing some thinking. About Christmas. About a lot of things." He paused. "Florence and I, we haven't always done right by Emily. Or by you and Laura. I see that now. Eleanor, your grandmother, Laura, she was a very wise woman. She saw things we didn't, but didn't want to." It was a significant admission, especially from a man as reserved as Henry. "I appreciate you saying that, Henry," I replied. It means a lot. I don't know if we can ever fully make up for it, he continued, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Regret? Shame? But I'd like to try. I'd like to get to know my granddaughter, Emily, better. The real Emily. Not just the quiet one who gets the small presents. My forensic accountant's mind, always looking for verifiable data, was intrigued. Was this a genuine shift or a strategic repositioning? But the sincerity in his voice, the uncharacteristic vulnerability, felt authentic. Emily would like that very much, Henry, I said. And so would we. And so began a slow, cautious process of rebuilding. Henry started calling Emily regularly, asking about her robotics projects, her science experiments. He sent her articles he thought she might find interesting, clippings from engineering journals, links to documentaries about space exploration. He even, to Florence's initial bewilderment, started trying to learn the basics of coding so he could understand Emily's world a bit better. Florence remained more resistant to change, her interactions still tinged with a degree of martyrdom. But even she began to make small, tentative efforts. She sent Emily a subscription to a science magazine for her birthday. A gift so an underscore point that Laura and I exchanged looks of genuine surprise. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments, occasional relapses into old patterns. But it was a start. The seismic event of that Christmas, the irrefutable statement made by Grandma Eleanor's legacy and our unwavering resolve, had indeed caused a structural readjustment. The old, unstable edifice of their family dynamic had been shaken to its core. And in its place, something new, something potentially more honest and equitable, was slowly, cautiously beginning to be built. It was a long-term project, this familial reconstruction, one that would require ongoing monitoring and careful management. But for the first time, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. The data, for once, was trending in a positive direction. The shift in Henry's behavior was the most significant and, frankly, unexpected outcome of that Christmas. His quiet efforts to connect with Emily, to understand her passions, were genuine and heartwarming. He'd call her up to discuss a new documentary he'd seen on black holes or ask for her opinion on a particularly tricky mechanical puzzle he was working on in his workshop. Emily, in turn, blossomed under his focused attention, her conversations with him animated and filled with the complex details of her latest scientific explorations. It was a bond forged late, but it was strong and authentic, built on shared intellectual curiosity rather than superficial familial obligation. Florence, too, continued her slow, often awkward, journey towards a new understanding. The Science magazine subscription was followed by a gift certificate to a local hobby shop that specialized in electronic components for Emily's 10th birthday, a gift that, Laura later learned, Henry had quietly suggested. Florence even started asking Laura for advice on how to talk to Emily about her school projects, admitting, with a hint of her old defensiveness, that all this science talk is a bit beyond me, dear, but I do want to show an interest. It was a far cry from the dismissive platitudes of the past. The dynamic between our two families, while still bearing the scars of past favoritism, was undeniably evolving. Carol remained the most resistant to this new equilibrium. Her bitterness simmered, occasionally flaring up in passive-aggressive comments during larger family gatherings, which we now attended selectively and with clear exit strategies in place. She couldn't seem to reconcile herself to the fact that her children were no longer the undisputed center of the grandparental universe, or that Emily's future was now demonstrably more secure and opportunity-laden than she had ever anticipated for her own offspring. Tom, her husband, seemed to maintain a policy of weary neutrality, clearly unwilling to engage in further familial conflict. Laura and I observed these shifts with a kind of detached, analytical interest. We had achieved our primary objective. Emily's emotional well-being and future prospects were secured. The secondary objective, a healthier, more equitable family dynamic, was a work in progress, with mixed results, but the trajectory was generally positive. The Emily Miller Future Enrichment Trust, meanwhile, was performing its intended function beautifully. We used it to fund Emily's participation in a prestigious summer STEM program at a leading university, an experience that further ignited her passion for engineering and connected her with like-minded peers from around the country. She returned from that program with a new level of confidence and a clear vision for her future academic path. The contrast between this Emily and the quiet, often overlooked little girl who had received the sad coloring book just a year and a half prior was profound. One afternoon, I was reviewing the quarterly statements for the trust, a routine task that always brought a quiet sense of satisfaction. The investments Alistair McPherson had recommended were performing well, the principal growing steadily. I thought of Grandma Eleanor, of her foresight, her quiet determination to ensure her great-granddaughter's potential was not stifled by the petty jealousies or blinkered vision of others. Her legacy was not just financial. It was a legacy of empowerment, of quiet rebellion against an unjust status quo. Laura came into my study, a cup of tea in her hand. "What are you smiling about?" she asked. "Just appreciating a well-executed, long-term strategic plan," I replied, gesturing to the trust statements. "Grandma Eleanor's and ours." She sat down, looking at the papers. "It really did change everything, didn't it? Not just for Emily, but for all of us. It forced everyone to reevaluate. Financial clarity has a way of doing that," I observed. "It strips away the emotional fog and leaves behind the hard data of priorities and values." We talked for a while about Emily's latest achievements, about upcoming family obligations, about the quiet contentment that had settled into our lives now that the constant low-grade warfare with the in-laws had largely subsided. "You know," Laura said thoughtfully, "I think your dad, Henry, he's found a new lease on life through his connection with Emily. He told me the other day he feels like he's finally getting to be the grandfather he always wanted to be, but didn't quite know how, especially with Florence and Carol dominating the narrative, so to speak." It was true. Henry's transformation had been remarkable. He was more engaged, more cheerful, his workshop now often a place where he and Emily would tinker together, a cross-generational collaboration of engineers. One seasoned, one budding. As for Florence, her journey was slower, more fraught with ingrained habits of comparison and a certain martyrdom. But even she, in her own way, was trying. She had started asking Emily to explain her robotics projects, and while her comprehension was limited, her attempts to listen, to engage, were a significant departure from her past dismissiveness. Carol remained the outlier, a fixed point of resentment in a slowly shifting familial constellation.